The room went silent. I stood in the mahogany-paneled office of Sterling and Associates, the prestigious law firm that had handled my father's estate for 30 years. Across the desk sat Marcus Sterling, a man who had been like an uncle to me until the day my father's heart stopped. Now, he wouldn't even meet my eyes. He was shuffling a stack of papers, his hands trembling slightly, while my stepbrother, Julian, smirked from the leather armchair beside me. Julian had already moved into the mansion, changed the locks, and put my father's vintage car collection up for auction. "I'm sorry, Leo," Marcus said, his voice cold and clinical, stripped of the warmth I'd known for decades. "The will is ironclad. Your father left the entirety of the estate, including the controlling shares of the shipping company, to Julian and your stepmother. You were left a small stipend of $50,000, provided you vacate the guest house by the end of the week. There is nothing more to discuss." He closed the leather folder with a finality that sounded like a coffin lid shutting. Julian let out a short, mocking laugh. "Did you really think Dad would leave the empire to a quiet clerk like you, Leo? You've spent 5 years filing papers while I've been out making deals. You're a footnote in this family. Now take your check and crawl back to whatever hole you live in." He tossed a yellow envelope under the coffee table. I didn't reach for it. I didn't even flinch. I had spent years being the underestimated son, the one who listened while others shouted. I reached into my inner coat pocket and pulled out a weathered, cream-colored envelope. It didn't look like much. No legal seals, no fancy wax, just my name written in my father's shaky, late-stage Parkinson's handwriting. I placed it on the desk. "Marcus, you said you wouldn't speak until the official probate was filed, but you and I both know about the second desk protocol my father mentioned in 2018. Marcus's face went ash gray. He stopped breathing for a full 3 seconds. Julian's smirk faltered, his eyes darting between the lawyer and the letter. "What are you talking about? That's just a scrap of paper," Julian hissed. I leaned forward, my voice calm and steady. "Open it, Marcus. Read the 3rd paragraph aloud. Or should I call the district attorney and ask them why a primary executor is withholding a codicil?" Marcus's hand shook as he reached for the letter. He broke the seal, his eyes scanning the paper. As he reached the middle of the paper, his jaw literally dropped. He looked at me, then at Julian, then back at the letter. "Leo," Marcus whispered, his voice cracking. I thought they destroyed this." "Read it," I said. My voice was a low hum, the sound of a predator that had been waiting in the tall grass for years. Julian stood up, his face reddening. "This is a joke. My mother and I have the original will. We have the witnesses." He tried to snatch the letter from Marcus's hand, but the lawyer pulled it back instinctively, his professional instincts finally fighting through the fear. "It's a handwritten codicil," Marcus stammered, his eyes wide. "It's a logic clause. Leo, I had no idea you were the one who drafted the restructuring of the Singapore accounts." Julian froze at the mention of Singapore. That was the crown jewel of the company, the offshore holding that kept the entire empire afloat. Julian had been trying to access those funds for weeks, only to find them locked behind a multi-signature encryption he couldn't bypass. "I didn't just draft them, I encrypted them. My father knew your mother was draining the primary accounts, Julian. He knew you were selling off company assets to pay for your gambling debts in Macau. He played the role of the dying old man perfectly, while I played the role of the loyal clerk. We were a team. You were a spectator." The flashback hit me hard. 3 years of being insulted on Sunday dinners, Julian throwing wine on my shoes and telling me I was lucky to have a job in the mailroom. My stepmother, Evelyn, telling the guests I was the help when I arrived for Christmas. I had taken every insult, every humiliation with a nod and a smile. I wasn't being weak, I was collecting data. Every email Julian sent, every forged signature Evelyn tried to pass off, I had a digital carbon copy. "This letter," Marcus said, his voice gaining strength, "directs me to a safety deposit box in Switzerland. It claims the will we just read was a decoy used to identify who would attempt to embezzle the estate during the transition period." Julian lunged at me then, his fist swinging wildly. I stepped aside, years of quiet discipline making the movement effortless. He stumbled into the desk, knocking over a crystal decanter. You're lying. You're a nobody. You're nothing." I looked down at him. "The nobody just activated the audit, Julian. By the time you get home, the forensic accountants will already be at the front gate." But as I turned to leave, Marcus called out, "Leo, wait, there's a postscript. It's not just about the money. Your father, he mentions your mother, the real reason she left." I stopped. My mother had disappeared when I was 10. I was told she ran away. "What does it say?" I asked, my heart hammering. Marcus looked terrified. "It says, check the floorboards of the summer house. The truth isn't in the money. It's in the foundation." The drive to the Hamptons was a blur of high-speed turns and adrenaline. The summer house had been boarded up for a decade, ever since my mother vanished. Evelyn had always claimed it was too painful to visit, but now I realized it wasn't pain, it was a crime scene. I arrived just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, skeletal shadows across the overgrown lawn. I didn't need a key. I knew the back window had a faulty latch. I'd used it as a kid to sneak out. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of rot. I headed straight for the study, my father's private sanctuary. I pulled back the moldy rug and began tapping the floorboards. Hollow. I used a crowbar I'd brought from the trunk. The wood groaned and splintered, protesting the intrusion. Underneath lay a small, fireproof briefcase. I pulled it out, my hands trembling. Inside wasn't money. It was a stack of old Polaroid photos and a micro-cassette recorder. I pressed play. The voice that filled the room belonged to my stepmother, Evelyn, but it wasn't the refined, upper-class voice she used at Gallus. It was sharp, venomous, and desperate. "He's getting suspicious, Julian. If he finds out the merger was just a shell company from my father's debt, he'll cut us out. We need to handle his wife first. She's the one whispering in his ear." Then, a second voice, younger but unmistakably Julian. "I've already spoken to the driver. A car accident is too messy. We'll tell him she ran away with the tennis instructor. I've already forged the letters." I felt the air leave my lungs. They hadn't just stolen my inheritance, they had stolen my mother. They had gaslit me for 15 years, making me believe she abandoned me. I looked at the Polaroids. They showed Evelyn handing a thick envelope of cash to a man I recognized, our old head of security, a man who still worked for her. Suddenly, the front door creaked open. Heavy footsteps thudded on the hardwood. "I knew you'd come here, Leo," a voice boomed. I turned to see Evelyn standing in the doorway, framed by two large men in dark suits. She wasn't smiling. She held a small silver pistol pointed directly at my chest. "You always were the smart one. Quiet, observant, and far too much like your mother. That's why she had to go, and that's why you won't be leaving this house." I held the microcassette up. "This recording is already uploading to a cloud server, Evelyn. The moment my heart rate goes above 140 or drops to 0, it goes live to the police." She laughed, a cold, dry sound. "Do you really think the police in this town aren't on my payroll? Give me the briefcase, Leo, now." One of the men stepped forward, but I didn't back down. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "I'm not calling the police, Evelyn. I'm calling the one person you fear more than the law." The phone picked up. I put it on speaker. "Is it done?" a voice asked on the other end. It was the CFO of the global conglomerate that had been trying to hostile take over our company for months. "The evidence is secure, and the woman who tried to defraud your merger is standing right in front of me." Evelyn's face went white. She had been trying to sell the company behind the CFO's back. Now her biggest buyer knew she was a fraud. "Leo," the CFO said, "keep her there. My security team is 2 minutes away." Evelyn's hand shook. You betrayed the family business?" "No," I said, my voice like ice. "I just performed a hostile takeover." The next morning, the skyscraper in downtown Manhattan felt like a fortress under siege. I walked through the glass doors of the headquarters, the staff whispering as I passed. Word had leaked that the quiet son had spent the night at the police station, not as a suspect, but as a witness. I entered the boardroom. Julian was there, looking disheveled, sitting at the head of the table as if he already owned it. Beside him sat Evelyn, her eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses, her lawyer whispering frantically in her ear. "This meeting is unauthorized," Julian shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "I am the majority shareholder by right of succession." I sat at the far end of the table, opening my laptop. "Actually, Julian, you're an occupant of a seat that no longer exists. If you look at the screen behind you, you'll see the latest filing from the SEC. The giant monitor flickered to life. It showed a corporate structure so complex it looked like a spider web. At the very center was a company called Aletheia Holdings. 5 years ago, my father realized you were funneling money out of the shipping lanes. He didn't confront you. Instead, he authorized me to create a debt trap subsidiary. Every time you stole $1 million, you were actually buying shares in a company that was legally designed to collapse back into my personal trust upon his death." The board members, mostly old men who had ignored me for years, began murmuring. "In simpler terms," I continued, "Julian has spent the last 5 years buying his own bankruptcy. Every asset he thinks he owns is collateral for a loan held by Aletheia, and I am the sole owner of Aletheia." Evelyn stood up, her composure cracking. "This is a lie. Those signatures are forged. Marcus, tell them." Marcus Sterling stood up from the corner of the room. He didn't look at Evelyn. He walked over to me and placed a heavy leather-bound ledger on the table. "I've reviewed the second desk protocols, Leo. Everything is in order. The signatures are verified by third-party forensic experts. As of 9 a.m. this morning, Evelyn and Julian have been removed from all executive positions." Julian lunged across the table, his face contorted with rage. "I'll kill you. I'll burn this whole place down before I let you take it." Security guards, men who had previously taken orders from Julian, stepped forward and pinned him to the table. "There's one more thing," I said, standing up. I looked directly at Evelyn. "The police found the floorboards, Evelyn, and they found the driver. He's been in a private care facility in Jersey for 10 years, paid for by your charity fund. He woke up this morning, and he's talking." Evelyn's sunglasses slipped. For the first time, I saw the pure, unadulterated terror in her eyes. "Leo, please," she whispered. "We're family." "No," I said, leaning in. "You're a ghost story, and I'm the one who finally ended it." But as the police entered the room to take them away, Julian let out a manic laugh. "You think you won, Leo? You think the Aletheia files are complete? Check the last page of the ledger. Check the name of the other beneficiary. Dad wasn't just protecting you, he was hiding someone else." My heart skipped. I grabbed the ledger and flipped to the final page. There, in red ink, was a name I hadn't heard in 15 years. A name that meant everything I thought I knew was still a lie. The name scrawled in red ink was Sarah Miller. I stared at the page. Sarah Miller was my mother's maiden name, but she was gone, or so the world believed. Underneath her name was a series of coordinates in a single word: awaiting. "Who is she?" I demanded, turning to Marcus. The lawyer looked like he'd aged a decade in the last hour. He avoided my gaze, his fingers twitching. "Leo, your father, he was a man of many secrets. He didn't just want to protect the money, he wanted to protect her." "Protect her from what?" I yelled. "She's been missing for 15 years. You let me believe she left me." "She didn't leave you," Marcus whispered, checking the door to ensure the police had fully cleared Julian and Evelyn from the hallway. "She was hidden by your father, not from Evelyn, but from the people Evelyn was working for." My head spun. This wasn't just a family squabble over a shipping company. This was something much deeper. I looked at the coordinates. They pointed to a small, remote island off the coast of Maine, a place my father used to visit every summer for business. "Leo, don't go there," Marcus warned. "The moment you look for her, you trigger a final notice clause. The people who wanted her gone, they'll know she's still alive." "I don't care," I said, grabbing my coat. I'd spent my life being the quiet observer. I was done observing. I was going to find the truth, even if it meant burning the rest of the empire to the ground. I drove through the night, arriving in a small pier in Maine just as the fog was rolling in. I hired a local fisherman to take me to the coordinates. He looked at the map and shook his head. "Nobody goes to Dead Man's Ledge, son. There's nothing there but an old lighthouse and ghosts." "I like ghosts," I said, handing him a stack of bills. As the boat cut through the icy water, I checked my phone. I had a dozen missed calls from an unknown number. Then a text appeared. "Turn back, Leo. You're opening a door you can't close. S." I didn't turn back. I jumped onto the rocky shore of the island and climbed the steep path to the lighthouse. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air smelled of salt and oil. And there, sitting at a small wooden table, was a woman with graying hair and eyes that looked exactly like mine. She didn't look surprised. She just looked tired. "You have your father's stubbornness," she said, her voice a soft echo of my childhood. "Mom?" I whispered. She stood up, but she didn't hug me. She pointed to a computer monitor on the wall. It was a live feed of the boardroom I'd just left. "You did well with the company, Leo, but you made one mistake." "What mistake?" "You assumed Evelyn was the villain. She was just the distraction. Look at the man standing behind Marcus in the footage." I looked. A man in the gray suit, someone I'd barely noticed, was currently inserting a USB drive into my laptop. "That's the man who killed your father," she said, "and he's currently downloading the encryption keys to every bank in the world." The cliffhanger? The man in the gray suit looked up at the camera and smiled. It was the honest judge who had supposedly been my ally in the courtroom that morning. I stood in the cold lighthouse, watching the screen in horror. Judge Holloway, the man who had supposedly been my ally in the courtroom, wasn't just a judge, he was the architect. "He's been waiting for you to consolidate the power, Leo. Your father knew the company couldn't be saved from the inside. He had to funnel everything into Alethea so that one person, you, would hold the key. But Holloway needs that key to bypass the final security layer." The final notice clause, I realized. By coming here, I unlocked the last gate. Suddenly, my phone chirped, a video call. It was Holloway. He was sitting in my father's chair, propping his feet up on the mahogany desk. "Hello, Leo," his voice smooth and terrifyingly calm. "I must thank you. Julian was too erratic, Evelyn was too greedy, but you were the perfect, diligent son. You did all the hard work of gathering the assets into one neat little pile for me." "You killed him," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "You poisoned his medication." Holloway shrugged. He was a stubborn old man. He thought he could outsmart the system, but the system always wins. "Now I have a proposition for you. Give me the final master code, the one your mother is holding, and I'll let you both live. You can stay on that island until the end of time. If not..." He turned the camera toward the boardroom window. A black van was pulling up to the curb, and men with tactical gear were stepping out. "I've already planted the evidence in his safe. And your mother? Well, a lighthouse is a very flammable place." My mother looked at me, her eyes filled with a strange, calm light. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, old-fashioned brass key. "He's bluffing about Marcus, but not about the fire. Leo, there's a sub-basement under this lighthouse. Go, now." "I'm not leaving you again," I shouted. "You're not leaving me," she said, shoving the key into my hand. "This key doesn't open a safe, Leo. It opens the real Alethea." Suddenly, the lighthouse window shattered. Red laser dots danced across the walls. "They're here," she whispered. I grabbed her hand and we dove into the narrow staircase just as the first flashbang detonated above us. We scrambled down into the darkness, the smell of salt intensifying. At the bottom, there was a heavy steel door. I shoved the key in and turned it. The door didn't lead to a room. It led to a server farm, a massive underground hub humming with blue light. "What is this?" I asked. "The truth," she said. "Your father didn't just own a shipping company. He owned the data backbone of the entire legal system. This is where Holloway's justice ends." But as I stepped toward the main console, a shadow moved in the corner. "I'm afraid I can't let you log in, Leo," a voice said. I turned.
It was Marcus Sterling. He was holding a silenced pistol, and his clothes were stained with blood. "Marcus," I gasped. You were on Holloway's side?" "No," Marcus said, his eyes tearing up. "I'm on their side." He pointed the gun not at me, but at my mother. "She's not who you think she is, Leo. Ask her why she really disappeared."
The hum of the servers felt like a physical weight in the small room. My mother stood perfectly still, her face a mask of cold indifference. Marcus's hand was shaking, the suppressor on his pistol twitching. "Tell him, Sarah," Marcus yelled. "Tell him about the blood contract of 1998. I looked at my mother. "Mom, what is he talking about?" She sighed, a sound of ancient weariness. "Your father was a good man, Leo, but he was a desperate one. When the company was failing 25 years ago, he didn't go to a bank. He went to a private consortium. They provided the capital, but they demanded a living asset as collateral. Someone inside the family to act as their mole for life. She volunteered," Marcus spat. "She wasn't hidden to protect her. She was hidden because she became one of them. She's been Holloway's handler for 15 years. She's not the victim, Leo. She's the boss." The world tilted. The woman I had spent a decade mourning, the woman I had just risked everything to save, looked at me and smiled. It wasn't a mother's smile. It was the smile of a CEO. "It was for the family, Leo," she said smoothly. "If I hadn't taken the deal, your father would have gone to prison, and you would have grown up in a foster home. I sacrificed my life so you could have yours. Now I need you to step away from that console. Holloway is just a pawn. He's been liquidated. The consortium is taking direct control now." "Liquidated?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Check the news," she said. I glanced at a nearby monitor, a breaking news alert. Judge Holloway found dead in apparent suicide in his chambers. "He served his purpose," she continued, stepping toward me. "He cleaned up the Julian and Evelyn mess. Now the company is clean and ready for the merger. All you have to do is sign the Alethea transfer. We can be a family again, Leo, a real, powerful family." Marcus stepped forward, his gun still raised. "Don't do it, Leo. The moment you sign, you're just another living asset. They'll own your soul." "Shut up, Marcus," she snapped. "You've been a loyal dog for years. Don't start barking now." I looked at the console. I looked at the brass key still in my hand. Then I looked at the mother I didn't recognize. "You're right," I said, my voice becoming that quiet, underestimated whisper again. "My father was a desperate man, but he was also a genius. He knew you'd eventually come for the keys." I didn't sign the transfer. Instead, I shoved the brass key into a slot labeled Emergency Override and typed a code I had memorized from my father's hidden letter, the one Julian thought was a scrap of paper. "What are you doing?" she screamed, her composure finally breaking. "I'm not signing the company over," I said. "I'm deleting it, all of it, the assets, the shipping lanes, the offshore accounts, and the evidence of the blood contract." "You'll be a pauper," she shrieked. "You'll have nothing." "I've been a nobody my whole life," I said, hitting the enter key. Suddenly, the server lights turned from blue to a violent flashing red. A countdown appeared on every screen. 30, 29, 28. "The island is rigged," Marcus whispered. "Leo, we have to go." But my mother didn't run. She lunged for the console, her fingernails clawing at the keys. "No! My life's work! My sacrifice!" I grabbed Marcus by the arm and pulled him toward the emergency exit. We sprinted through the salt-smelling tunnels as the ground began to shake. We reached the rocky shore and dove into the freezing Atlantic just as the lighthouse erupted in a pillar of white light. The shockwave knocked us unconscious. I woke up on a beach 3 miles south of the ledge. Marcus was beside me, coughing up seawater, his arm broken. The lighthouse was gone. The third air was gone. The empire was gone. Or so I thought.
3 days later, I sat in a small diner in Portland, wearing a cheap sweatshirt and drinking bitter coffee. My face was on every news channel. Shipping empire collapses overnight, thousands of jobs in limbo, CEO Leo Sterling missing. Marcus sat across from me, his arm in a sling. "You did it, Leo. You actually did it. The consortium is in shambles. Without the data backbone, they're being exposed by every regulatory agency in the world. But you're a wanted man. They'll blame the collapse on you." "Let 'em," I said. I pulled a small, battered USB drive from my pocket. The servers didn't just delete the money. They sent a copy of the blood contract and 20 years of the consortium's emails to the FBI, the Interpol, and the New York Times. "But you're broke. You gave up billions." I smiled. It was the first real smile I'd had in years. I reached into my bag and pulled a small, leather-bound book I'd snatched from the lighthouse sub-basement before it blew. My father didn't just have a second desk protocol. He had a third desk. He knew the company was a cage. He spent the last 10 years of his life buying up small, independent green energy patents under a name nobody would ever look for. "What name?" Marcus asked. I flipped the book open. Inside were deeds to 3 solar farms and a battery manufacturing plant in the Midwest, all registered to the Nobody Trust. "He left me the future, Marcus, not the past." Suddenly, a black SUV pulled up to the diner. 2 men in suits walked in. They didn't look like consortium thugs. They looked like feds. "Leo Sterling?" one asked. "Yes," I said, not moving. "We've reviewed the files you anonymously provided. We have a lot of questions about a woman named Sarah Miller and a Judge Holloway." "I'll tell you everything. But first, I want to see my stepbrother and stepmother." "Why?" the agent asked. "Because," I said, standing up, "I want to be the one to hand them their eviction notices."
The prison visiting room smelled of bleach and despair. Julian sat behind the glass, his orange jumpsuit 3 sizes too big. He looked gaunt, the arrogance finally drained from his face. Beside him, Evelyn sat like a statue, her skin sallow without her expensive creams and lighting. "You," Julian spat, his voice cracking, "you destroyed everything. We're facing 30 years for money laundering and conspiracy. My mother is being looked at for what happened to your mom." "I didn't destroy it, Julian," I said, my voice calm and low. "You and Evelyn built a house on a foundation of bones. I just stopped pretending the house was stable." "You have nothing either," Evelyn hissed, leaning toward the glass. "The company is gone. You're as poor as the clerk we always said you were." I pulled a document from my folder and pressed it against the glass. It was a court order. "Actually," I said, "I just bought the family mansion back from the bank at a foreclosure auction for pennies on the dollar. I'm turning it into a sanctuary for victims of corporate fraud. I've already had your things packed, Evelyn. They're in a storage unit in Jersey, the cheap kind, the ones with the rusted doors." Evelyn's eyes welled with tears, not of regret, but of pure narcissistic rage. "And Julian," I continued, "I found the records of your gambling debts. The people you owe money to in Macau, they found out you no longer have the Sterling name to protect you. I'd stay in protective custody if I were you." Julian's face went white. He slumped in his chair, realization finally hitting him. He had spent his life stepping on me, never realizing I was the only thing holding the floor up. "Why?" Julian whispered. "Why didn't you just tell us? Why the long game?" "Because," I said, standing up to leave, "my father taught me that the loudest person in the room is usually the weakest, and the quietest person is the one you should never, ever underestimate." As I walked out of the prison, the sun was shining. I had no billions, no fleet of ships, and no empire. But for the first time in 30 years, I had a name that wasn't a lie. I got into my modest car and looked at my phone. A message from an unknown number. The fire didn't take everything. Meet me where the tide meets the trees. My heart stopped. The handwriting in the digital attachment was unmistakably my mother's. She was still out there. I drove back to the coast of Maine, to the spot where the lighthouse once stood. The ruins were still smoking, a blackened tooth against the gray sky. I walked down to the shoreline, where the tide was coming in, swallowing the jagged rocks. There, standing by a lone pine tree, was a figure in a heavy coat. I approached slowly, my pulse thrumming in my ears. "You survived," I said. The figure turned. It wasn't my mother. It was the quiet assistant from the law firm, the one who had given me the evidence folder in Part 5. She held a small wooden box in her hands. "She didn't make it, Leo," the assistant said softly. "But she wanted you to have this. She knew the consortium would never stop hunting her, so she stayed behind to make sure the server wipe was permanent. She chose to end the blood contract with her own life." I took the box. Inside was a single silver locket with a picture of me as a baby and a small handwritten note. "Leo, the quiet strength you have is the only legacy worth keeping. Use it to build something that doesn't need secrets." I looked out at the ocean. The karma of the Sterling family had finally come full circle. The greedy were in cages, the traitors were in the ground, and the empire of lies had been washed away by the sea. I turned back to the assistant. "What will you do now?" She smiled. "The Nobody Trust needs a CEO, Leo. Someone who knows how to keep a secret, but chooses to tell the truth." I looked at the box, then at the horizon. I wasn't the nobody anymore. I wasn't the underestimated son. I was the man who had survived the storm. I walked toward my car, leaving the ruins behind. My phone buzzed one last time. It was a notification from the Trust's bank account. The first solar farm had gone online. The world was getting a little brighter, one quiet move at a time. They called me a nobody. They treated me like trash. They thought silence was weakness, but they forgot one thing. Silence is where the truth waits. Never underestimate the quiet man. Karma does not forget.